What's happening, folks? Welcome back to another video of me trying to find things to make videos about whilst socially distancing in an apartment in Philadelphia. In today's video, I thought I would compare the image quality and dynamic range of the Fujifilm X-T2 with the Canon 5D Mark III. I've got a 50mm equivalent lens on the X-T2 because it's a crop sensor, and a 50mm lens on the Canon because it's full frame. Both of these have about 24 megapixels. I believe the Canon is the much older camera, or at least a little bit older, and the X-T2 is a bit newer, but the Canon is at a higher price point, so it'll be interesting to see how the image quality differs between them. I have this one that I use for weddings as well as Mark IV, and I have this one which I use for everything else, but I would quite happily use this for weddings if I didn't already have the Canons. And in the future, I probably will switch to Fuji, but anyways, I'm comparing something I don't really care about, so let's just crack on. Some people might care about. Alright, so starting with the desk pictures, I did the first picture at ISO 100 because that is the base ISO of the Canon, and I'm just gonna go nuts and just lift the shadows all the way up. It did pretty well there. And bring the highlights down. Nothing was really blown out, and brighten it up a bit. See how it's dealt with that. Don't really see much grain. There's a very fine grain there actually, but that might be because of the out of focus area. It still looks sharp, retains contrast, dynamic range is very good at low ISOs. This is the Canon file, the last one was Fuji. This one actually has less dynamic range at ISO 100, so the Canon doesn't look as good here. You've got this kind of like grainy look, and I don't normally mind grain, but this is like the digital noise where it's kind of, you can see greens and purples in there, and it's almost like you can see stripes going through the picture, so it doesn't look as nice. So that's, I mean, you wouldn't normally be pulling shadows and highlights up and down that much, but it gives you an idea that I think the Fuji is handling that much better. All right, on to the next one. We'll just do the exact same thing. We're on the Fuji file first. We'll just pull the highlights all the way up, shadows all the way down, maybe brighten it a touch, but this file was brighter for some reason. Zoom in there. Very fine grain shows up on the lens cap, but otherwise it looks nice and sharp, it looks good. This is the base ISO for the Fuji at ISO 200, and the Canon file, I feel like there's more dynamic range at ISO 200. I feel like it's doing better. There's chromatic aberration here, this purple fringing, but that's to do with the lens more than it is the sensor really. And I feel like the Fuji looks a little better. There's some barrel distortion with the Canon. Let's see if we can just get rid of that. Get rid of the sharpening as well. You know what, we'll get rid of the sharpening altogether. Might fix the profile itself. Yeah, I would say the Fuji looks better in this case. White balance is a little different, but we'll not worry too much about that. We can just set it both to daylight. It's about the same. Fuji's maybe a little more green in this one. All right, on to the next one. I bumped it all the way up to like ISO 800 here. It's kind of that mid-range sort of point with the ISO. Shouldn't really see too much problems here with either camera. You can see the grain there on the Fuji, but it's still a perfectly usable file, even though you wouldn't normally pull shadows up that much. It still looks pretty good to me. The Canon doesn't look too bad actually. You can see the grain showing up. I see less of that digital sort of noise, that color, purple and magenta kind of colouring that I was seeing at ISO 100 for some reason. I don't know why that is, that seems strange to me, but looks good at ISO 800, no, not really any problems with that. Change it to daylight white balance, see if that does anything to it. That's the Fuji, and that's the Canon. Both look pretty good. All right, on to the next one. So we're at ISO 1600 this time, so starting to get a little high for older cameras. Switch it to daylight white balance, pull those shadows up, highlights all the way down. We definitely need to brighten this one a bit. You see we're starting to lose contrast when we pull the shadows and stuff up, but not too much. It's looking pretty grainy there, especially in those shadow areas. And on to the Canon, yeah, it's starting to lose some sharpness, a lot of grain showing up. I would say there's maybe even less contrast than there is with the Fuji. I feel like the Fuji handles it better. It's actually more noticeable than I thought it would be. I didn't think it would show up that much. All right, now we're at ISO 3200. I think this is where I usually start seeing a lot more grain with Canon during weddings. I usually try not to go higher than this with the Mark III at weddings. I regularly go much higher than this with the Fuji for street photography, but I'm not pulling the shadows up this high. And it's looking really quite grainy there. A little bit of loss in sharpness. Doesn't look as bad as I really thought it would, but it doesn't look good either. And as always, you wouldn't normally pull the shadows up that much, but just to see how well this thing does, I'm just going crazy with it. And same with the Canon, it's looking really grainy seeing that sort of magenta colouring in there, a lot less contrasty than Fuji is. It's not holding up as well. Again, and obviously I wouldn't be pulling it up this much if I was shooting for anything else, but yeah, it doesn't look as bad if I just chill it out with the editing a little bit, but it falls apart the more I try to edit it. Now we're on ISO 6400, so shadows up, highlights down, brighten it up a little bit, and here we can see the Fuji file's really falling apart. That looked really grainy. In most cases you would not use that. If I dial it back a bit here, this doesn't look bad now. The grain sort of gets hidden a little bit in the shadows. You don't really see it as much, and there's plenty of contrast, but yeah, it's starting to lose contrast. Looking a bit more green than before, and the Canon's looking a lot more pink, but same deal, very grainy, loss of sharpness, loss of contrast. Doesn't look great, but dial it back and that would probably be usable at that, as long as you're not trying to brighten it up too much. Keep the shadows dark and it should be fine. So the next one, this is 12,800. Both of these I would expect to fall apart at this ISO with a bit of editing. Set them both to daylight, take the sharpening off, profile corrections on, pull the shadows up, and straight away you can tell there's a horrible green cast in there with the Fuji file. Doesn't look great, super grainy, loads of detail lost, does not look nice at all, but dial it back and you don't really notice it as much. And the Canon here, I prefer the colors in the Canon here. I think the Fuji really lost its, it really had a horrible color cast going on in there. But there's again plenty of grain, very noisy, lost a lot of contrast. Fuji's again much more green, and they're probably as bad as each other for different reasons at this point. Like, there might be more contrast in Fuji, but you've lost all the detail and there's a horrible color cast, and Canon is just, it's not sharp. The grain's really bad at this point, and you can see some sort of magenta color noise in there. And that's about it for that part. Let's take a look at the portraits that I did of my wife. The first ones were just at whatever, I did everything at f2.8, so there was like no real loss of sharpness with the wider apertures, even though the 35 f2 is going to have a deeper depth of field. I wasn't really trying to measure depth of field, it was just to give an even, so that if they have the same exposure it gives them the same chance in this comparison. So this was with the exposure set right in the middle. I would even say it looks a little on the dark side, but it's just the way the meter was reading, I guess. So if I brighten them up a little, bring the highlights down a bit, bring the shadows up a bit, I'll make them both daylight, take the sharpening out and enable profile corrections, maybe even just brighten it a little more. That's the Fuji, and this is the Canon. They both look fine to me. I would say the Canon looks a little brighter even. I don't know if that's because I've got more of the window in there, but it's the same exposure value with the same light, so it shouldn't really change that much. But yeah, Fuji in this case looks more green, and Canon looks a little bit more pink. Skin tones look nice on both of them, don't really have a problem. Then I did one with a stop overexposed. I should have probably done 2 stops because it's not really that overexposed. This is all going to be recoverable. Put it at daylight balance again, sharpening off and profile corrections on, highlights down, bring the shadows up a bit. So this one is the Fuji file, this one's Canon. Again, Canon looks brighter. I don't know if that necessarily means it's a good thing or a bad thing. Not sure if I got the focus, I think I got the focus right on this eye. It's a little off on this one. At f2.8 there's not much to work with on the full frame, but it looks pretty sharp on the Fuji. Give it a second, there we go. But it's got a deeper depth of field, so it makes it easier to get the eye perfectly in focus. That looks horrendous, but nothing was particularly blown out, and they both look terrible when you do that. Fuji looks a lot more green, and I would say flatter. The Canon has a bit more, it's a little bit brighter, but yeah. One's as good as the other, I would say there. This is with a stop underexposed. This might even have went more than 1 stop under. I'm not sure if the light changed or something. So let's brighten them up. This is the Fuji file. Pull up to there, put them shadows up. Looks pretty good. Daylight white balance. Very green again with the Fuji, and I would say, honestly, I think the Canon looks better in this case. I think maybe just for portraits, I don't know if it's the depth of field or it's brighter, maybe the skin tones are just looking better straight out of camera with just a little editing. I mean, Fuji doesn't look bad either though. So yeah, I think both of these cameras do a pretty good job with your average like window light portrait. No complaints with either of them. They both look sharp with those lenses. They both handled it well enough. Like, I don't really have a problem with these. I think that's about all I've got. I would leave it up to you to make the ultimate decision. Maybe the dynamic range is more important to you in certain situations, but I think both of these cameras handle it well enough for a lot of needs. When I shoot weddings with the Mark III, if I'm in a sort of high dynamic range situation, I do tend to lean on the Mark IV a bit more. So if you're the type of editor who pulls shadows up a lot, you're maybe going to struggle sooner with the Mark III. The Fuji held on a little bit better. So if for any reason you were trying to decide between these two cameras, I know they're not really that compatible. The Fuji probably handles shadows a little bit better. However, it does seem to depend on the scene that you're shooting. You get different color shifts at different ISOs. Weirdly, the Canon at its base ISO had less dynamic range than it did at higher ISOs. I don't know if I did something wrong, and I don't know if it was the lighting situation or something, but yeah, it seemed to do better at 200 than it did at 100, and that seems odd to me. That should not be the case. But otherwise, I don't know what else to say. These are both great cameras. You wouldn't really go wrong getting either. I would probably still lean towards the X-T2 because it's smaller. I think it's still cheaper, and it's newer as well, and it seems to do a little bit better in the dynamic range situation. Image quality wise, they both look about the same, and the grain gets just as bad with either of them at high ISOs. So hopefully you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about it. I'll do my best to answer. I'm not the most technical of photographers, so I'll answer if I can. If I can't, I'll send you to someone else. And if you enjoy my videos, check out this playlist up in the corner. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.